Next, I want to cover other aspects of primary industries, and one is just the geography in general of urban versus rural landscapes. So this is a figure showing urban areas in the United States in red, and the non-urban areas that are not in red. And most of California is non-urban. In fact, 95% is outside of urban areas. About nearly half of that is in rangeland or desert, the extensive deserts of the interior, and about 35%, excuse me, is forested areas, the sort of brown color, especially in Northern California. And then another 12% is in agriculture. These are places with relatively low population density, a lot more open space, and a lot more reliant on primary economic activities, agriculture, timber, and so on. And a lot of these, especially the agricultural areas, have a real strong concept of place. And place in geography is where there is a strong kind of cultural association with the economic activity that's there in this example. So, for example, the Napa region is well known as one of the most world famous wine growing region. So they produce a whole lot of wine grapes and a whole lot of wineries as well. Another example closer to home is Selma, just south of Fresno, which is considered, they have this logo that they've given themselves of the raisin capital of the world. So for raisin grapes, Selma is considered a primary area for table grapes and raisins. Likewise, Gilroy is well known as the garlic capital of the world. I don't know if they grow the most garlic in California, but it is so exclusive to the agriculture there, and it's really celebrated. They have a garlic festival there, for example. And another example in Fresno County is the town of Mendota, which is considered, or self-considers itself, the cantaloupe capital of the world. So these are a few examples of where the primary activities give a strong sense of place because of that is associated with these locations. Another topic is challenges to California agriculture, and one particular one is climate change. And there are ways that climate change will directly affect California agriculture, for example, changes in temperature. And then other ways that it'll indirectly change agriculture in California. And the most significant is changes in irrigation supply, changes in the water supply in California. The most dire concern is loss of snowpack in the Sierra Nevada. So if we don't have as much water coming from the Sierra Nevada, the scarcity of the water affects the land use. So for example, we have permanent crops like orchards and vineyards. They can't skip a year. They cannot go out of production for 1 year. So even during a drought, they have to maintain a water supply. Cities in the same way, that they can't afford to go dry either. So orchards and vineyards in cities will pay higher amounts for water during a drought period. And the crops that are a little more seasonal, like row crops, cotton, that sort of thing, they can skip years. So they will end up going out of production to maintain a water supply for cities, orchards, and vineyards. So this is a vineyard. So if you think about it, during a drought year, you can't just stop watering this vineyard because the whole vineyard will die. The same thing goes with orchards as well, that these orchards have to be maintained year after year after year. However, for these row crops, you can choose not to plant them 1 year or 2 years and sell the water instead. And as that happens, what we actually start to see is examples where places go to try to dry farming. It's not as economically productive, but it can be done with less water. And in some cases, places will go out of farming production. It's sort of the one thing I've noticed when places go out of farming is you start to see abandoned vehicles in the fields. That's sort of a telltale that farming hasn't gone on there for a while because no one's come and removed the junk car. And then over time, the landscapes start to revert to a more natural looking landscape. until if left idle long enough, it's really hard to tell that this is a place called Pinochet Valley where it used to have cotton fields, but you could hardly tell that today.